Myths, legends, ghost tales. Stories of mystery and imagination that date back through all cultures to the dawn of time. They were used to entertain children tucked safely in their beds at night. They were used to explain that which could not be explained through the science of the day. And they were used to make accounts of actual events a little more interesting. Webster's defines legend as a story coming down from the past, especially one being popular and regarded as historical, although not verifiable. The Washington County area is rich in such legends, handed down through the generations. These stories date back as far as the Civil War and before. Most are rooted in historical facts and are an invaluable tool for a rich, clear understanding of our ancestors and their daily lives. Let us explore this unique oral history of our community. Let's unlock the door to our past. "1992 marks the anniversary of two historic communities in Washington County. Boonesboro, my home, which is 200 years old, and the neighboring community of Funkstown, which is 225 years old. Both of these communities, with their various cultures and influences, have yielded many superstitions and tales that spark the imagination. It's here in Funkstown where we'll begin our first story, along the banks of the Antietam Creek, whose waters hold the mystery of the Indian Maiden.
When I was in my early school years, when I was 8, 9, there was an old gentleman who lived adjacent to the school who would take the time to talk to children. And he started this story about this Indian maiden who in September, about the middle of the month, always came up the Antietam Creek in her canoe looking for her white boyfriend who was run off by her parents. This story was discussed between the kids in school. Bunch of stuff. Didn't happen. Garbage. So I talked to Mr. Kaufman. I guess the man was in his late 80s. And the more we talked, the more I was convinced that he was telling the truth. So he told me that on such and such a night, if I came down, of course this never happened except at midnight, if I came down, he would show me this Indian maiden on the creek, and I came down. Now I'm sure I didn't have my parents' permission. I just have a hunch at 8 or 9 I wasn't allowed out at midnight. I came down, met him, and his land adjoined the creek. We walked from his house back to the creek and sat along the bank. And it was warm days and cool nights. And you could see the mist coming off the creek. And he kept telling me that if I watched the middle arch of the bridge, I would see her come paddling out of the mist and up the creek. Now, she would never come as far as his property. She came up to a point and turned around and went back. And he talked this to me for half, three-quarters of an hour. And then he said, "See, here she comes." And I did see her. Now I realize that probably wasn't true. But Mr. Kaufman convinced me that I saw this Indian maid with long black hair, very dark eyes, beautiful young girl. No one will ever convince me I didn't see her.
Cheney House, now Ruth's Antiques, is one of the older houses in Funkstown. It was built in 1820 and was used as a makeshift hospital during the Civil War after the Battle of Funkstown, which took place July 10th, 1863. Many soldiers were brought here, wounded in desperate need of care, and many died here and were buried on the grounds. It wasn't long afterward that stories began circulating throughout the town about the strange happenings within Cheney House.
Well, the Cheney House was built in 1820, and it was owned by Dr. Cheney. It was a private residence up until about the Civil War, when the Battle of Funkstown occurred, and they turned the house into a hospital. And legend goes that many soldiers had their limbs amputated, and many soldiers died right in this spot. Our family purchased a house in 1942. I was born here, and up until about 20 years ago, I lived here all my life, where we've operated this business. It's been a good house, but growing up, I was always told by the neighbor next door that the house was haunted. And I can remember coming home and afraid to go to bed, and my mother would be so upset with this neighbor because she was telling me all of the ghost stories of the house. And one of the legends is that there was a ghost, and it was a woman, and she used to play the piano at midnight. And the lady who owned a house said at midnight the piano played. And then she'd tell me other things that would happen upstairs. And I was really frightened. And my parents always said, there's no ghost. There's no ghost. But of course I didn't really believe them. Years went by and I forgot all about it. And as I said, I lived here most of my life. And we've operated this business. And one afternoon, a lady who worked here said, Carol, I've got to talk with you. And she said, I just saw the ghost. I saw the ghost that they've always talked about. And I said, oh, Jessie. She says, don't tell your mother. Don't tell your mother. And it occurred upstairs. And Jessie said I was washing dishes, and I felt this funny feeling over my shoulder, and I looked over my shoulder, and she said here was a silhouette of a lady, and she had a Civil War dress on, and I thought right away she's a nurse, and she had her hair up in a bun. She never said a word. She just looked at me. And she even had the apron, long sleeves, and it was a Civil War nurse, and then she vanished.
I've been with Ruth's Antique for approximately 40 years with her father and with Carol. And while in the earlier times, they had a lady by the name of Mrs. Grove, and she was often told me maybe a half a dozen times about the ghost that was supposedly been in the house that she was referring to. And I used to, at times, sort of kidding. She had a real sense of humor, and she was very sincere and a religious lady. And I would walk up behind her when she was busy doing something in her little workshop, and I would tap her on the shoulder, and she would suddenly rebound and look around with an astonished look on her face, and her hand would go to her mouth, and she'd say, oh, Paul, don't scare me like that. I thought that was the ghost here it's in the house. And I would laugh and shrug it off. And then later on, when the incident that Carol was talking about, Mrs. Grove would always say, see, I told you there was a ghost in here, in this house. And that was the one story. And then the other story was of the house of the piano. Used to sit here in the big front room when the people before Mr. Beckley and his wife bought the house. They have a big spinet piano that sit in the front room here, and I heard Mrs. Spinfrock's daughter would tell, at times she would tell my wife and tell the other girls, my wife happened to be the same age, and play with her, and they would come up on a Friday and Saturday evening here in this big room, and they'd have the children when they was going to high school, and they'd have dances, and her mother would play the piano over there. And after everything had quieted down early in the morning, Peg, which was Mrs. Spinfrock's daughter, would often say she would hear that piano playing, and there was nobody, everybody was in bed, and it would wake her up. And it just seems, I don't know whether people believe in ghosts or anything, but I have every reason to believe, without a doubt in my mind, that somewhere this story could have been true. And I don't think that Mrs. Grove or Peg Finnepock were the type of people that would exaggerate.
And if you knew Jessie, you would know that Jessie really believed what she saw. And I thought, can't be true, but at the same time, I really did respect Jessie, and I knew that Jessie was not superstitious, but I forgot all about it. And about 5 years later, we had a set of banquet tables, just like these. In fact, they were identical to these. And a lady came in from Nevada, and she purchased the banquet tables, but we had to ship the tables. Now, the banquet tables sat right in this spot. And of course, this is the spot where many men died. After she purchased the tables, we had to crate the tables. We built a big wooden crate, placed the tables in the crate, and shipped them to Nevada. She called and said the tables arrived safely, and she placed them in her dining room. 6 months later, she called, and she said, our life has never been the same, that we sent her a ghost. And I just laughed. I really laughed. I said, I don't believe this. And she started telling me the antics of this ghost. So over the next year, we had quite a dialogue going, and she said, all kinds of things disappear, and we can't find them. And you know where we find them? We find them under the banquet table. She said, we bought a sideboard, and we placed it in a dining room, and the crevices disappeared from the sideboard. Or from the table, and we found them in the sideboard. And she said, well, we didn't think anything about it. Suddenly, the crevices disappeared again, and they were under the table. And I said, do you have children that are playing games with you? She said, no, they're all toddlers. There's no way that they're playing games. And then she talked about the baby quieting down, and she'd run up in a room, and she'd see the rocker going back and forth. And finally, they decided that this ghost was a friendly ghost, and they got used to her. Unless something would disappear, they'd say, where is it? And it would arrive under the banquet table.
When this table came to us, we were living in Reno, 1980. Again, a beautiful table. It was welcomed into the home, and all was well until one afternoon when I was sitting downstairs and I heard someone walking the hallway upstairs. Well, I was supposedly home alone with my two dogs. The two dogs immediately looked up the stairs, started to wag their tails, and they ran up. Well, I thought my husband was home. He somehow snuck in. Well, went up to investigate. There was no one there. And I thought, how peculiar. This is strange. But again, did not think ghost. I mean, who would? So went downstairs, started to read my paper again. The same thing happened. So 3 consecutive times I heard footsteps down the hallway. And it wasn't just 1 or 2. It was the whole length of the hallway. Well, I grabbed a poker and went upstairs to investigate. Nothing was there. I looked under beds, in shower stalls, everywhere. There was no one there. And yet the dogs are wagging their tails. So I thought, who knows what's going on? That was basically the first incident we had. And again, did not think ghost. We were ready to move in August of 81 to Phoenix, which we did. Everything was moved and had a wonderful home here in Phoenix. The table, the way the table is made, there are clamps holding pieces of the table together, different sections of the table. So I packed these carefully with my silver, not wanting to lose them. These were irreplaceable. And my husband and I both decided we would hand carry the clamps with the silver. We did that. When we arrived in Phoenix, the silver was there, but the clamps were missing. And we couldn't figure that out. And again, did not think ghost. We just thought, well, something happened in the move, who knows? So from basically August to November, we had no clamps for the table. In November, we had the whole family for Thanksgiving, and we're talking about all of the strange little things that have happened to us. Things disappearing. Again, odd things, a bathrobe, slippers, a purse. Again, all chalked up to being absent-minded on our part. But then someone brought up the notion, they were teasing, they said, oh, you've got a spook, you've got a haint. And we thought, no, this is ridiculous. Not in Arizona. There's nothing old in Arizona. You know, we don't have a ghost. Well, the next morning, this is again the day after Thanksgiving, I go to put my silver away, and there in the drawer are these clamps. And that startled me, needless to say. I thought how peculiar, and my first thought was someone's playing a trick on me. Well, we talked to everyone, and everyone assured us that no one had a play in this. And from that point on, I started to think spirit. We had a kitchen door, for example, that was a very odd kitchen door. It was very hard to close. You really had to bang this thing closed. It would open on its own. I would be waiting for my husband to come home in the evening, in bed watching Johnny Carson. He would get home very late, and I'd think, oh, there's John. I hear the kitchen door opening and closing. Well, I'd wait for him to return to the bedroom. No, John, no, John. I'd go and investigate. The car was not in the garage, and the door was locked, just like it should have been. And I thought, that's odd. I know that door opened. Because, again, the squeak and the groan it would give, I could hear it all the way in the back of the house. So this went on for months, this door opening and closing. And I thought I was going mad. Well, one day I'm standing at my sink and peeling carrots. And I definitely felt the strangest sensation. Someone was standing behind me. I whirled around, and there was no one. Absolutely no one. And yet this overpowering presence was there. I had goosebumps. I was frightened. I couldn't breathe. And it was so fast. I yelled. I screamed out loud. And then I thought, oh, I'm losing it. Something's wrong with me. This is ridiculous. Turned around, started peeling my carrots again. The same thing happened, only this time it was behind my neck. It was closer. And I whirled around again, holding my peeler as my weapon. No one was there. But that was the first contact we had with what I now call Sadie.
I still didn't believe her until she called and she said, we saw our ghost. And I said, you saw the ghost? And she said, yeah. I said, describe it. And she said, Carol, the ghost is wearing a dark dress, and she described this very tight silhouette, and she said, it reminds me of a Civil War nurse. Well, my heart just started pounding. I said, how did she wear her hair? She said, up in a bun. And she had on a white apron, long sleeves. She described the ghost that Jessie had described.
We were watching television, and I walked from the family room into the kitchen area, going to get a drink of water, something as simple as that, and walked through a mist, a cool, damp mist. There is no way in the house that we live in, again, Arizona is a very dry, has a dry climate. You're not going to find mist in your home. And yet, in that second I passed through this mist, I had a mental image of this entity, this spirit. It was definitely female. I saw that she was wearing long sleeves, a floor-length dress. The fabric was very coarse. It was almost a gray in color, maybe an off green or something, very dark color. Aproned front. She wore her hair tightly pulled back. She had a bun on the top of her head, and I knew she was Sadie. In that second, I knew. And also what came through was that she was somehow gentle, kind, not to be feared, more of a caretaker, if you will.
The children love her. The children say she's with them all the time. And finally the husband said, "That's it, I've had enough. There's no ghost in this house, forget it." And she said a cantaloupe went flying across the room and turned upside down, just through midair. So now Sadie exists. I believe it, we all believe it, but the ghost is no longer with us and we miss her.
This whole area of South Mountain, all around Zittlestown and Washington Monument, has long been known about the tales of ghosts and strange happenings here. Probably this can be explained by the fact that South Mountain is the site of a bloody battle of the Civil War, and all battlefields have their share of ghosts. Now, as you know, in 1827, the citizens of Boonesboro marched up the top of South Mountain at this whole area of the Blue Rocks, and in one day, they constructed the first monument in the nation to George Washington. But for some unknown reason, years later, the entire top of that stone monument just came tumbling right down. The whole top just fell off. Now, soon after this strange occurrence, this whole area of the Blue Rocks got a sinister reputation of harboring evil spirits. People said that if you came here just as dusk fell on the earth and you listened, you would hear strange noises. There would be screams and moans, all of these sounds. It was so scary. Some people said that the sobs were like there was some baby or some young girl lost in the woods, couldn't find her way. Other people said there were shrieks, and there were all these moans and groans as if somebody was hurt very badly and needed help. It became so scary that anybody in his right mind would never come at the Blue Rocks after dark. On the day before the Battle of Antietam, this whole area was just swarming with Confederate soldiers. They were everywhere. They were camping in the woods. They were all along the roads, among the rocks. It was unbelievable that the number that was actually right here. Some of these soldiers knew that the battle was inevitable, probably the next day, and so they were doing all kinds of things in preparation. Some of the soldiers were gathered around a well at the home of a Zittlestown farmer, and they were filling their canteens with water. Now, it so happened that this farmer had a lovely young daughter named Lucinda, and she was caught up in all of this activity. She had never seen this many soldiers in all her life, and she was standing right there beside the well, helping those soldiers fill their canteens. And as one soldier stepped forward, his name was Simon. He was a very young soldier, probably no more than 16. And he looked up and he saw the beauty of that girl, and all of a sudden, he thought to himself, I would give my very life for somebody as beautiful as she. They were in love. At least they thought they were in love, which is sometimes the same thing, and sometimes it's even better. Well, they had the rest of the day together, and they made the most of it. But the next day, there was a horrific battle that took place on South Mountain. And all day long, Lucinda was worried. What had happened to Simon? Was he killed? Was he laying out in the battlefield wounded? Somehow, he got through that battle without a scratch. and they were so happy together. But then Simon told her that the Confederates had planned that evening in darkness to retreat and go to Sharpsburg. And she knew that if they separated, they would never see each other again. And she begged Simon. She said, "Desert that rebel army. Stay here with me. Let's spend a life together." Well, it didn't take too much convincing for Simon, because he was in love with that Zittletown belle. But he was scared, because he knew if he were caught as a deserter, he would be hanged. But Lucinda had an idea. She said, "In the area of the Blue Rocks, there are a lot of caves, and everybody's scared to go to the Blue Rocks because that's haunted. We'll hide you in one of those caves, and nobody will ever dare to go there." That's what they did. He hid in one of the caves at the Blue Rocks. And the next day, his comrades had all retreated to Sharpsburg, and he was missing.
Simon? I haven't seen him. Wonder where he is. You seen Simon? Anybody seen Simon? Possibly he's killed. I don't know. Hope not. Maybe we'll find him.
And they thought, poor Simon, he was probably killed on the battlefield. They knew he was such a good soldier, he would never desert. They didn't know that he was with his sweetheart and they were planning their life together. Well, 2 days later, there was a bloody battle that took place at Sharpsburg. The Battle of Antietam was only 1 day long, but there were over 23,000 soldiers that fell. 3 of the comrades of Simon were killed. And they turned into spirits. And as spirits, they knew everything. They knew immediately that Simon had deserted. He had skedaddled with his girlfriend and left them to fight the war. They were enraged. They were so mad. And as spirits, vapor-like, they just swished right through the air to South Mountain, to the area of these Blue Rocks. And there, on one of the big flat rocks, Simon and Lucinda were sitting there holding hands, so deeply in love. Those spirits were enraged. They were so enraged, and with their supernatural powers, they caused the entire stone monument to just topple over on that couple. Miraculously, that couple wasn't killed. They were saved by being in a crevice in those rocks, but there were tons and tons of boulders. They were completely entombed. And they thought they were going to die together. But Lucinda said, "There's all of these neighbors around the Blue Rocks. We'll yell for help, and they'll come, and they'll dig us out. I know they will." They called, and they cried, and they sobbed. Those people heard them, but they didn't come because they said, "Aha, I know. Those are some of those evil spirits, and they're trying to entice us to come to the Black Rocks." No way. So they didn't come. So that poor couple, entombed in agony and starving, finally, after a month, they welcomed death together. Now, it is said that if you come to this area of the Blue Rocks on the eve of the Battle of South Mountain, just as dusk settles on the mountainside, if you listen carefully, you can hear the moans and the groans of that couple as entombed in there for eternity. They're still crying for help. in their agony. And if you dare to climb down onto the Blue Rocks and go to that area where they're entombed, and you look closely, you will actually see the scratch marks on the face of that cave where Lucinda was frantically clawing, trying to save herself. Now, I've told you that story just the way it was told to me. That's the reason why Washington's monument suddenly came tumbling down.
We owned our ground went about halfway through the monument, where the monument's are sitting. We at one time we owned half the monument. We didn't know it, but the line went right through it. It sat on between two lines. The monument already had a crack in it, and people thought it was a big lightning thunderstorm hit it. But years come to find out, that farmers over in Frederick County side had a bunch of daughters. They was using that there for good picnic grounds. So as one farmer told his daughter what was going to happen if they didn't stay away from it. So he followed them over one night, and he got over there. The girls wasn't there, but he threw one in, charge of dynamite.
For the Confederate troops engaged in the Battle of South Mountain, this is almost akin to the ancient classic Battle of Thermopylae, where a very small number of defenders are charged with holding a mountain pass against a much superior force coming at them. And very much like the Spartans at Thermopylae, the Confederates do fairly successfully defend the pass for most of the day. The fighting begins early in the morning, and only by evening to nightfall are the defenders driven away from it. The Confederate commander at the Gaps, General Daniel Harvey Hill of North Carolina, remarked about as he looked out in the valley in the morning and saw these tremendous columns of blue troops snaking their way across the roads through the Middletown Valley and toward the South Mountain Gaps, how incredibly lonely he felt that with his small division of between 4,000 and 5,000 men, he was going to be charged with keeping somewhere around 18,000 to 20,000 or more Union troops at bay all day long. And in fact, if you include the battle at Crampton's Gap with Franklin's Corps, the Union numbers become even more overwhelming. And so it's a very difficult task that the Confederates had. They had pushed their outer defenses well down to the bottom of the mountain and then fought their way backwards up toward the Gap. And by spreading his thin forces out as much as he possibly dared, Hill did a very effective job of using them. When the battle began, Longstreet, of course, immediately rushed Confederate reinforcements back from Hagerstown, where he had marched with the balance of the army. And so late in the day, you'll see some Confederate reinforcements. But for most of the day, D.H. Hill is on his own here as he fights this very lopsided battle where the terrain is his only friend.
This is the monument that marks the spot where General Reno was killed during the Battle of South Mountain. The Battle of South Mountain was a bloody battle. Folks that had witnessed that said that it seemed like the side of the mountain ran red with blood. There were several generals killed during that battle. But after the battle was over, as darkness fell, the Confederates retreated under cover of darkness and marched over to Sharpsburg. Now, the next morning when the sun came up and the Union generals looked over the battlefield, the Confederates were gone. They had retreated during the night. All they saw were the dead and dying just strewn all over the battlefield. Now, as quickly as possible, they took care of the wounded, but they didn't have time to bury the dead. But they realized if they left those bodies out there in the hot September sun, there might be a catastrophe. There might be an epidemic. So they decided that they would offer $1 a body to all the local farmers to bury those dead Confederates. Now, right here in this spot is Fox's Gap. This is where some of the worst fighting took place of the entire day. And just a stone's throw from here is the spot where Old Man Wise had his log cabin. Now, that cabin was in horrible shape before the battle. But the morning after the battle, folks could not believe that the cabin was still standing. It was so full of holes from cannons and shot and shell. Now, that morning, as he strolled out and looked in his yard, he saw bodies everywhere. And he had heard about that offer of $1 a body. And he looked out there and he thought, I'm going to make myself a heap of money. So Old Man Wise started out over the battlefield and started to drag those dead bodies, one by one, back to his house. And he had all these bodies laying there in his front yard. And he thought, boy, that's sure going to be an awful lot of digging to dig graves for all those dead rebels. And then he had an idea. Over there he had a well, and that well wasn't much good. It was a dry well. And he thought to himself, I'm going to take those dead bodies, and I'm going to bury them all right, but I'm going to bury them in my old well. And that's what he did. He took 58 dead rebel soldiers, and he shoved, and he stuffed, and he forced all of those in that dry well. And then when he was finished, he threw in a lot of soil, and he covered them up. Now, all the people around had heard about this, and they were up in arms. They said those dead rebels, they were our enemies, but that's sacrilege. You don't stuff them in a well. That's not the proper burial. But Old Man Wise, he was tickled with himself. He thought, well, I'm going to go down to Boonesboro, and I'm going to buy myself a new tobacco pipe and some tobacco. And that's what he did. He walked down to Boonesboro, got himself some supplies, and about 2 weeks later, in the evening, he was sitting on his front stoop on an old cracker box. And he was puffing away on that pipe, just enjoying himself, thinking, boy, I made myself a heap of money. And all of a sudden, he saw a movement down the road. Who are you?
I've come to have you turn me over, Mr. Wise.
Who are you?
I'm most uncomfortable lying on my face. Turn me over. Please, turn me over. Please, turn me over. Turn me over. Turn me over.
And he climbed in that well with his spade, and he started to dig. And he was digging as fast as he could. Finally, the 13th soldier. That was the one. Well, then he started to dig, and sure enough, that soldier was resting on his head. No wonder he was uncomfortable. He very carefully got that soldier out, and he reburied him. So he worked through the night, soldier after soldier, burying each one. And finally, as the sun streaked through the morning sky, he had that last soldier buried. And he got down on his knees and he said a little prayer. He said, please, please don't haunt me anymore.
there's a pattern that emerges with the first-hand literature, the diaries and the letters. They note the dead Confederates. They note the Johnny on the wall. Some of them note that the cabin up there at Fox's Gap, Wise's cabin, was used as a field hospital. There were tables set out front. There were amputations going on. But one thing that the first-hand accounts don't notice on September 15th is an old man dumping bodies down his well. There's no mention of that until September 16th. Now, by September 16th, most of the Union Army is off of the mountain. They're down in the Antietam area. The only Union soldiers left are those that are burying the dead. And I have a gentleman's diary who was on burial detail at Fox's Gap, and he gave a number of 75 Union soldiers on burial detail, and it took them 4 days to bury the Confederate dead. They were still burying Confederate dead on September 18th, a day after Antietam. And they finished up on the 18th and went to join their units down at Antietam. Now, what happened on the 16th? There's one gentleman who wrote his memoir some years later, and he makes note of a Union burial detail, drunk on whiskey, dragging bodies to this well. And how it got started, one possibility might have been that some of the limbs from the field hospital had been dumped down the well to get rid of them, and the soldiers, being under the influence of the alcohol, sought the easy way out. And let's get something straight, too. Burial detail was not pleasant duty. I mean, even under the best of circumstances. And it always surprised the men on burial detail how quickly the bodies would become offensive. And in his memoirs, Samuel Compton, the man who saw the detail, said the bodies had become so offensive that the only way the men could endure it was to be staggering drunk. So we have this first-hand account on September 16th of bodies being dumped in a well. And there were 58 bodies put in the well. According to the records from the reinterment that was done 12 years later, there were 58 bodies taken out of the well. How did the legend of Wise's well get started? I think there's a couple of reasons. I believe that the Wise family, and that would be Daniel Wise and his son and daughter, were present on the 15th and the 16th. I believe they couldn't get back into their house on the 15th because it was used as a field hospital. And I believe at least one family member was there on the 16th to watch the Union soldiers dumping the bodies down the well. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, a gentleman from the Sanitary Commission, which was like the Red Cross, which followed the armies, making sure they had proper medical supplies, he noticed a hand sticking out of the ground. And he asked Daniel Wise about it. And Wise told him that the Union boys started it, but I stopped them, and I contracted with General Burnside for $1 a body to finish it. And I put 58 or 60 in that well, and I don't have my money yet, and what are you going to do about it? It's my belief that Wise was trying to get some monetary compensation for his ruined well. I don't think the well was abandoned. 50 years later, there's a story that says that the well was abandoned when it's advantageous to the legend to have it abandoned, because if it was abandoned and they threw bodies in it, no harm was done. But I believe it was a working well, and the Union soldiers, put the bodies in it, and Wise wanted to get some money for his ruined well. There is no record that exists that ever suggests that Wise was paid $1 a body or 1 cent a body or anything a body. We've been through the National Archives for war claims, and there's no $60 paid out to Daniel Wise. So I believe he was trying to get some money. He saw this gentleman from the Sanitary Commission, knew it was some kind of official organization, and maybe he could get the money out of him. And this gentleman from the Sanitary Commission, he tells Charles Walcott about it, and Walcott puts it in his book, The History of the 21st Massachusetts, publishes that in 1882, and that's the first formal published account of Daniel Wise doing the deed. Now, I'm sure there was a local story. The man from the Sanitary Commission probably talked to the citizens of Boonesboro, and there is some evidence to suggest that Daniel Wise was a colorful character. He was what was known as a root doctor, a practitioner of folk medicine. So, it probably would have made sense to the people in the area. Oh, that crazy old man up on the mountain? Yeah, sure. It wouldn't surprise me that he put the bodies in the well. So there was probably a local story. There was a gentleman who visited the site in 1865. Trowbridge was his name. And he confronted Wise with the story, and Wise denied it. The Trowbridge words, he said he doesn't like to confess to it now. Well, of course not. He didn't do it. So I believe he told the man from the Sanitary Commission that he did it to try and get some money. The other reason for the legend persisting these 130 odd years is that it's a neat little legend. I mean, here's this old eccentric man, and he stops these soldiers from burying, dumping bodies down his well, and he takes a general personally and, confronts him and contracts with him and finishes it up. And then as the years went on, ghosts came into the story, and this gentleman in Middletown, this T.C. Harbaugh, he wrote a story in 1909 called Turn Me Over, where Wise is actually haunted by some soldier in the well who's face down, uncomfortable, and wants Wise to turn him over. It's of note that Mr. Harbaugh himself, in a letter home in 1919, mentions that it was the 11th Ohio that dumped the bodies down the well, not a crazy old man. And to have this legend saves the reputation of the Union troops. It just wouldn't have been seemly to have stories of drunk Ohioans dumping bodies down a well in the post-war years. In the years after the Civil War, there's at least 5 presidents from the state of Ohio. So, the legend helped save the reputation of the Union troops.
Legends and myths and folk tales frequently fall prey to serious historians who discount them. And I suppose if we're writing a serious history of Washington County and what is accomplished, maybe that would be correct. But you've got to remember that history first and foremost belongs to the people who will record it and observe it their way. The best that professional historians can do is attempt to sort things out as what is fact and what is not, what can be proven and substantiated. But we will never, nor should we try to, eradicate legends, myths, and folk stories, because that's, I think, what gets a lot of people interested in history.
Ghosts, legends, and folk tales were definitely a part of our ancestors' lives, and they are definitely a part of our history here in Washington County. These are just a few of the many tales of hauntings and strange occurrences in the area, handed down through family and friends. Some people still swear to their authenticity, while others enjoy them as merely entertaining stories. But one thing is for certain: people of all ages and backgrounds are fascinated by the realm of the unknown. And what about you? The next time you hear that bump in the night, the creaking on the stairs, or a soft low moan in the wind, will you explain it away logically? Or will a vague, uneasy feeling that you can't quite put your finger on prompt you to go exploring? Who knows, maybe you'll end up with your own story to pass on to your grandchildren someday.